Welcome back to Sleep Books at the Midnight Library, where we transform thought-provoking nonfiction into calming bedtime stories. Tonight, we embark on a journey through history, literature, and cultural perception as we explore a book that challenged the West's understanding of the East. Orientalism by Edward W. said, "This book is more than just an academic critique. It is a lens through which we can understand how power and knowledge are intertwined. It reveals how Western perspectives on the East have shaped politics, literature, and even modern-day relationships between cultures. As you settle in, allow yourself to unwind. Let the weight of the day slip away as we gently uncover the story behind this groundbreaking work. Before we begin, we'd love to know where you're listening from. The Midnight Library has listeners from every corner of the world, and it's always wonderful to hear from you. If you'd like to read the full book, you'll find links in the description below. And if you have suggestions for future sleep stories, we're always open to your thoughts. Now, take a deep breath in and a long, slow exhale, and let's begin. About the author, Edward W. said. Edward W. said was a Palestinian-American scholar, literary critic, and one of the most influential intellectuals of the 20th century. His work in post-colonial studies helped to reshape our understanding of culture, power, and identity. He was a professor at Columbia University and wrote extensively on literature, politics, and history. Born in Jerusalem, raised in Egypt, and educated in the United States, Said's unique background allowed him to see the world from multiple perspectives. He understood how the West viewed the East, and how these ideas were often based on myths rather than reality. His book Orientalism, published in 1978, remains one of the most important works in cultural studies. It reveals how Western scholars, writers, and politicians have historically misrepresented the East, often using stereotypes, romanticism, and political motives to shape their views. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let's gently explore the 5 key ideas from this book, why they matter, and how they continue to influence the world today. The 5 key takeaways from the book. 1. The Orient is a Western creation. The concept of the Orient was not discovered, but invented, shaped by Western ideas rather than reality. 2. Orientalism served political and economic interests. It wasn't just about culture. It was a tool for controlling and justifying European colonial rule over Eastern societies. 3. Western scholars shaped how the East was perceived. Writers, academics, and artists created a distorted image of the East, often portraying it as mysterious, irrational, and exotic. 4. The East was viewed as the West's opposite. Europe saw itself as rational, modern, and superior, while the East was framed as traditional, emotional, and primitive. 5. Orientalism still influences how the East is seen today. Even after colonialism, many Western media, politics, and academic fields continue to portray the East through an outdated and biased lens. Now, let's explore each of these ideas in more depth as you sink deeper into rest, deeper into comfort, and deeper into sleep, exploring these key takeaways in detail. 1. The Orient is a Western creation. Imagine a place not defined by its own people, but by how outsiders describe it. This is what happened with the East, or what the West called the Orient. Instead of seeing each culture in its own light, Western scholars and travelers painted the entire region with a single brush, emphasizing mystery, sensuality, and backwardness. For centuries, writers and artists constructed an image of the East that was often more fantasy than reality. They described vast deserts, veiled women, and ancient palaces, but rarely the modern cities, complex economies, or intellectual traditions that were also part of these societies. Rather than recognizing diversity and complexity, Orientalism created a dreamlike mirage, turning a vast and varied region into a single, exoticized fantasy. But just as a dream fades when morning comes, so too do illusions, and over time, these ideas were challenged. Tonight, as you close your eyes, let yourself release old perceptions and embrace clarity. 2. Orientalism served political and economic interests. What if the way you were described was not just inaccurate, but deliberately misleading? Orientalism was never just about knowledge, it was a tool for power. European empires used these stereotypes to justify their colonial rule, claiming that Eastern societies were too irrational to govern themselves. For example, when the British ruled India or the French ruled Algeria, they presented themselves as benevolent caretakers, saying they were bringing progress and civilization. But behind this rhetoric was a political and economic agenda, one that allowed them to control trade, extract resources, and expand their empires. The Western world's image of the East wasn't just about curiosity, it was about who held power and who did not. As you breathe in deeply and exhale slowly, let yourself release the weight of imposed narratives and sink into the quiet comfort of deeper understanding. 3. Western scholars shaped how the East was perceived. Much of what people believed about the East came not from its own people, but from European academics, writers, and explorers. Novels, paintings, and travel diaries reinforced ideas of mystical deserts, veiled women, and forbidden palaces. These depictions weren't meant to educate, they were meant to entertain. These scholars wrote about the East in ways that fit their own expectations, rather than reality. Instead of highlighting the rich scientific, philosophical, and cultural traditions of these regions, they focused on the aspects that seemed most exotic or strange. The problem? These images became the dominant view of the East, shaping real-world policies and relationships. But truth is always deeper than the stories we tell ourselves. Let yourself sink deeper into sleep, knowing that real wisdom lies not in labels, but in listening. 4. The East was viewed as the West's opposite. To define themselves, Western nations often contrasted their identity against the East. If Europe was rational, modern, and scientific, the Orient was passionate, traditional, and superstitious. If Europe was orderly, the East was chaotic. This contrast wasn't just a coincidence. It was a deliberate way of reinforcing European superiority. By defining the East as the other, the West could justify its domination and control. But the world is not black and white. Cultures are not opposites. They are complex, evolving, and interconnected. As you drift into sleep, imagine a world where understanding replaces opposition, where cultures are seen as they are, rather than through the lens of comparison. 5. Orientalism still influences how the East is seen today. Even though colonial rule has ended, Orientalist thinking remains alive. From Hollywood movies to news coverage, from academic studies to political speeches, the East is still often depicted through the same old lens. But the world is changing. More voices are being heard. More stories are being told by those who lived them. And just as the world wakes to new possibilities, so too do we awaken to a clearer, truer understanding of one another. Final summary. Wishing you a peaceful and restful night. Now let go of the day's thoughts, sink into your pillow, and allow sleep to take you. Good night and sweet dreams.